Emily's scream tore through the delivery room, sharp and raw, as another tiny cry rose above the chaos. A doctor staggered back, sweat dripping down his temple. 7. No. 8. He muttered, voice trembling with disbelief. Nurses exchanged bewildered glances. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't possible. Emily lay pale against the sheets, blonde hair plastered to her forehead, her lips cracked from hours of labor. She reached weakly for the nearest bundle, pulling the child to her chest. Then another was placed in her arms, and another, until her lap overflowed with fragile, swaddled life. Her body ached, her vision blurred, but her voice was steady. "They're mine," she whispered hoarsely. "Every single one of them. The babies, all 8 of them, let out soft wails. Their skin was deep brown, their curls dark, their eyes wide and unclouded. None of them looked like her." The air in the room turned heavy with judgment. A nurse gasped. A doctor muttered something under his breath. Emily heard them, but didn't flinch. She held tighter to the infants. When she finally stepped out of the hospital weeks later, the small town she called home did not greet her with warmth. At the grocery store, women fell silent mid-conversation, their gazes sharp as blades. At the diner, men hunched over their mugs, whispering words that carried just loud enough. 8 of them, and none looked like her. What kind of woman does that? Her own mother, Margaret, stood with arms crossed the first time she saw the bassinets lined up in Emily's cramped apartment. Her silver hair was pulled into a tight bun, her mouth curled in disdain. "You've lost your mind," she snapped. 8 mouths. How do you expect to feed them? People will laugh you out of town. Emily, exhausted but unyielding, looked her mother in the eye. "They're my children. I won't abandon them." "Then don't expect me to pick up the pieces when the world chews you up," Margaret retorted coldly, turning away. The world did chew her up. Bills piled high. Debts gnawed at her sleep. Emily stitched clothes from old sheets, mixed oatmeal thin so it would stretch further. She worked mornings at the bakery, afternoons cleaning offices, nights in a diner where her feet throbbed until she could barely walk home. She returned to the apartment reeking of bleach and sweat, but when the door creaked open and 8 little cries met her, a smile broke through the exhaustion. Neighbors weren't merciful. Mrs. Dalton next door banged the wall at midnight, shouting, "Some of us have jobs, Emily. Keep those kids quiet." On the street, a man sneered as he passed. "Lady, you can't raise a whole army. Give some away. Do yourself a favor." Her spine stiffened. She pulled the stroller closer, shielding the babies from his glare. "They're mine," she said firmly. "Not yours to decide." But the real battles came at night when the cupboard sat empty. Emily would sit at the wobbly kitchen table, coins scattered under the dim bulb, and realize there wasn't enough for formula. She drank tap water instead of eating, saving every scrap for them. She hummed lullabies in the dark as she braided tiny curls, her stomach hollow but her voice steady. She refused to give in. Every tear shed in silence, every blister on her palms, every hungry night was a promise to her children that they would not be ashamed of where they came from. And though the world mocked her in 1997, 25 years later, those voices no longer mattered. What had once been scandal was now proof of a mother's unshakable love, a miracle that could only be called family. When one cried, the others followed, their voices rising like a fragile chorus in the night. Emily gathered them into her lap, arms aching, whispering words she wanted so desperately to believe herself. "The world may see us as different," she murmured into the dark, "but we are family. That's all that matters." The years inched forward, heavy and relentless. The babies became toddlers, their laughter spilling through the thin walls of the apartment, filling cracks where silence might have settled. 8 curious voices asked endless questions, their small hands always reaching for hers. At school, they clung to one another, a line of siblings who turned heads everywhere they went. And then the questions came, heavier than she was ready for. "Mom, why don't we look like you? Why do people stare? Why did that man at the store call us names?" Emily knelt before them, forcing her voice to hold steady even when her heart broke. "Because some people are afraid of what they don't understand," she told them. "But listen to me. You are not a mistake. You are not shame. You are my joy." But joy did not cover the rent. One evening, she opened her door to find an envelope resting on the floor. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. The words blurred together, but the meaning struck like a blow. Eviction notice. 30 days. She had a month to leave. At the diner where she worked, her friend Clara gripped her arm, her voice pleading. Emily, you can't do this alone. Maybe adoption would be better. 8 kids. No one could expect you to survive this. Emily's throat tightened. That night, she sat on the floor of her tiny living room, the notice trembling in her hands. She looked up at the 8 small bodies sprawled in sleep around her, their chests rising and falling, their dreams unburdened. Her voice broke as she whispered into the silence. No, they stay with me. All of them. The weight of her choice pressed like iron against her chest, poverty on one side, the fear of losing them on the other. She didn't know if love alone could keep them together, but she had no choice. The battle had only begun. The eviction notice was the first storm, not the last. Emily fought through dozens more. She worked until her fingers split and bled, until her knees buckled from exhaustion. There were nights she locked herself in the bathroom, biting her fist to muffle the sobs so the children wouldn't hear. Nights when the thought whispered in her mind, I can't do this anymore. But every time despair crept in, she remembered him, their father. Machines had surrounded his bed, his breath shallow and weak, his eyes pleading even as his strength failed. Don't leave them, Emily, he had begged. Promise me. Promise you'll never let the world take them away. She pressed her forehead against his, tears falling onto his cheeks. I promise, she whispered. I'll never leave you, and I'll never leave them. When his hand finally went limp in hers, that promise became her anchor. It bound her to those children as tightly as blood. The years marched on. The whispers never stopped. Neighbors still muttered. Strangers still stared. But the children grew strong, their lives shaped not by cruelty, but by the fierce love of the woman who never let go. Scraped knees, awkward school plays, the endless questions about why they looked different than their mother, all of it came and went. And Emily met it with the same words, steady and unshaken. We are family. That's all that matters. 25 years later, the children were no longer children. They had become men and women with degrees, careers, families of their own. And none of them ever forgot who carried them through the storms. The reunion was more than a family gathering. It was a declaration. In a grand hall, 8 siblings stood together, dressed in the armor of success. The eldest wore a doctor's coat. The second stood tall in his lawyer's robe. One daughter carried herself in a sharp business suit, another with a stethoscope draped around her neck. Others held textbooks, portfolios, even children of their own. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward, whispering, Is this her? The same woman they called reckless? The one they mocked for raising children who didn't look like her? Yes, it was her. Emily sat in the center, silver hair framing her face, her body frail now, but her smile radiant. She looked at her 8 children, no longer fragile infants, but living proof that love had been stronger than gossip, stronger than judgment, stronger than every storm she had endured. They had once called her foolish. Now, the world saw her for what she had always been, a mother who had kept her promise, a mother whose miracle was not scandal, but family. The children surrounded Emily, some kneeling at her feet, others standing proudly behind her chair, their presence a wall of strength around the woman who had once faced the world alone. The same town that had sneered and gossiped now watched in silence, finally seeing what her sacrifice had built. During the ceremony, her eldest son stepped forward, his tall frame trembling as he leaned toward the microphone. His voice cracked at first, but his words burned with conviction. My mother was told to give us away. She was told she couldn't feed us, couldn't raise us, couldn't even love us the way we needed. But she did all 3. Every night, she went hungry so that we could eat. Every morning, she took jobs no one else wanted so we could go to school. She carried the weight of 8 children on her shoulders, and she never let it crush us. Applause thundered through the hall. Faces that once turned away in judgment now bowed with shame, tears streaking cheeks. Some of the very neighbors who had mocked her years ago sat with hands clasped, whispering apologies into the silence of their own hearts. A daughter stood next, her voice shaking as tears slid down her cheeks. She taught us that shame is not in who you are, but in the cruelty of those who judge. She showed us that family isn't measured in how easy it is. It's measured in how hard you're willing to fight for it. Today we are doctors, lawyers, business owners, parents, because she refused to abandon us. She was our shield, our teacher, our light. The hall erupted again in applause. Reporters scribbled notes, cameras flashed, but none of it compared to the sight of Emily, silver-haired, frail, but glowing with the joy of a promise fulfilled. She lived just long enough to see the world finally speak her name with reverence. The same papers that once called her reckless now printed the words, "Miracle Family." Strangers who once muttered insults now sent letters of gratitude. For the first time in decades, she was not a scandal, not a burden, not a cautionary tale. She was a mother whose love had defied the world. One quiet evening, as all 8 of her children sat crowded around her bed, Emily's breaths came shallow but peaceful. Her eldest leaned close and whispered, "You kept your promise, Mama." Her lips curled into a tired smile. "And you kept me alive," she breathed. "That's all I ever needed." With her hand still clasped in theirs, she closed her eyes and slipped away, surrounded by the children who had been her reason for every sacrifice. At her funeral, the church could not contain the crowd. Hundreds came, family, friends, neighbors, strangers, even reporters who had once chased scandal now humbled to witness grace. The streets outside were lined with people holding flowers, heads bowed in respect. The 8 children stood shoulder to shoulder before her coffin, their voices breaking but resolute. "She never left us," the eldest said, his words carrying through the hall. "And we will never leave her. Her sacrifice will live through us, through our children, and through everyone who hears her story." And then something happened that no one expected. The room filled with applause, not mourning silence, but thunderous, rising applause, rolling like a tide through every corner of the church. Applause at a funeral, something unheard of, yet nothing else could honor her better. Emily's legacy was not sorrow. It was triumph. It was the sound of a town that had once mocked her now standing to its feet, finally bowing to the truth of her love.